Press the bell icon on YouTube and don't miss another update.
Hi, welcome to a new episode of Economics. In the middle of last year, a major confrontation broke out between the Reserve Bank of India and the central government of Prime Minister Narendra Modi over the surpluses the Reserve Bank of India holds. The Modi government wanted the Reserve Bank of India to part more of its surpluses because it wanted to shore up the finances of the central government. This led to a lot of discussions within the RBI and a lot of toing and froing, and which resulted ultimately in the discussion veering towards autonomy of the Reserve Bank and what the central government can ask for and not ask for. Ultimately, they found some sort of a way out by appointing a panel headed by former Governor Bimal Jalan. And earlier this week, there was some kind of finality to the discussions of that panel, where it was decided that the government would go ahead and get some surpluses in tranches from in the next 3 to 5 years. This is not final yet. This report has not been submitted, but there have been reports that this is the way out the Bimal Jalan Committee has found. To talk about that, I have Professor Ila Patnaik with me. This is a very critical issue for both the Reserve Bank of India and the central government, because as you can recall, this may not have been the reason, but this could have been the last straw on the camel's back, as they say, for the previous governor Urjit Patel to move on from the Reserve Bank position. Hi Ila. Just tell us something about this whole surplus problem we had last year. And not the surplus problem, actually, surplus controversy. And now that the Bimal Jalan panel seems to have finalized its report, although we don't know the exact contents of the report, we know what the panel is planning to recommend. Could you just take us back and explain this whole thing about RBI surplus?
So any central bank issues money. That's what central banks do, and they do that for the sovereign. They do that for governments. So the government basically wants any currency to be issued, and the central bank does the job for the government. Now let's just step back on what is the balance sheet of the central bank, okay? Because I need to take you there to explain what these surpluses or profits are. Yeah. Now think of the balance sheet of the central bank as one where, on the one hand, it holds a bond, and that's on its assets, and on the liability side it issues currency. Okay. Now on the bonds, it earns interest. The interest is actually paid by the government to the central bank, because whoever is holding a government bond gets interest. Whereas for the currency, nobody pays you interest. You're holding currency in your pocket. So invariably, the central bank will make some money. Okay? So that is the essential nature of the central bank, that because it has interest earning assets on one side, and its liabilities, it pays no interest. So the interest that it earns, I mean, apart from just the cost of issuing the currency, in some operational costs, it will make profits. Now, most of the times, the way the world works is that because the central bank issued this money for the government, on behalf of the government, the profit belongs to the government. Okay. So there are ways in which mechanisms are devised through which central banks transfer the money to government. Now remember, we have an Act 1934 where it was the British government who didn't worry too much about whether RBI would be independent or not give it money, or the RBI would do. So there weren't there was no
such worries.
worry about there were no worries about that. So really, with that old act, what we have is a lot of ambiguity in the mechanism through which this surplus would be transferred to the government. So many countries either transfer the whole surplus, then get an approval for their budget, and then they spend that money, or they say, okay, we'll hold so much for operational costs, and so on. Now, there is a third thing for which money is to be held, and that is why the word you'll hear being used is risk capital. Okay? So that risk capital is that what if the central bank is holding government bonds, it holds domestic government bonds, and it holds foreign government bonds, or dollars as we say, it's forex reserves. Now, those forex reserves are often held as bonds of the US government or foreign governments. Now, what if the rupee appreciates? Okay. Now, let's just imagine a situation where the rupee goes from 60 to 50. On the liability side, the RBI has issued currency assuming that it is 60. And now suddenly its assets go down because it's measuring them in rupees and it's holding these dollars. So suddenly its asset side is facing a loss. Now, of course, we normally don't really worry when the rupee appreciates. It's...
there are people who are very happy when the rupee appreciates.
But, if you are a very small open economy, like say Norway, you might be holding all your central bank assets as foreign currency. And then you worry that if there is an appreciation, then you'll have a large change on your balance sheet. So there are people who believe that that central banks should hold equity capital or reserves or risk capital, whatever you might like to call it. While there are others who would say that, so what's the problem? If there is a loss, there can be an understanding, formal or informal, between the central government and the Reserve Bank. And then the central government can pay for it because, it's like I was doing this for you, I'm transferring my surpluses. If there is a loss, the central government will step in and pay. So that's really the risk capital that we are talking about. And what's happened over the years, because there was ambiguity in the Reserve Bank of India Act, so there are 3 sections that relate to the question of capital. And so section 47 says that RBI has to hold 5 crore. Now, in today's world, what's 5 crore? So anything over and above that, there's a bit of ambiguity about who would decide how it would be held. So what happened over the years was that the RBI decided to hold on much more. So it started putting money aside for contingency reserves and a few other small things. And it left the revaluation reserves. That is, that when, it was issuing rupees when the rupee was 10 to a dollar, to 70 to a dollar, but it did not monetize the difference. It did not issue as much as the rupee had depreciated. So it let that be. So in the process, it has about 9 lakh crores of reserves. And that's really when the government understood that's a bit too much. The RBI had also understood it was a bit too much. It had formed a couple of committees to look into this, and then, you talk about the various models in which various central banks transfer their surplus to governments. And there is a specific model in India which you talk about as the 4th model. Can you, tell us what was right about that model or what was not right about that model? So among the ways in which central banks transfer money to governments, we in our paper talk about 4, where 3 are one rule or the other. So it says a % of profits, or a certain fixed amount of reserves, or a cap on what you transfer. But the 4th is discretion, where it's not really clear and the central bank decides what it will hold. So I don't think that's working, because clearly that's leading to friction. So that's what the Bimal Jalan Committee is supposed to be looking at.
And this solution, or perhaps the possible solution they have found of transferring it in tranches in 3 to 5 years, you think that is the ideal way to go about it?
See, if the money is going to be transferred to the government and the government is going to spend it, then yes, you have to do it very slowly because it will be inflationary. If you use it for retiring government debt, and that's going to be non-inflationary. So what I think one hopes to see is that because you didn't transfer enough surplus, the government borrowed by that much more, and that led to an increase in debt. So ideally, the committee should say it should be used for retiring government debt. And also the benefits then don't just benefits and both the difficulties are not just concentrated in 1 year. So it's non-inflationary, and the benefits will be lower interest bill on government debt for coming years. So that will spread out the benefits.
But I mean, if you look at it the other way, don't you think for a government to think, okay, I have this cushion, I have the RBI surplus as a cushion, would that not be tempting to borrow more?
Just if it is done
Theoretically.
No, if it is done in one go, and if it is not done as retiring government debt, then yes, it is tempting to spend more.
Okay,
spend more because you're getting a bigger non-tax revenue. You're being paid that. So that's why it should not all be done in 1 year, because after all the surpluses were not built in 1 year. So it should be spread over time, but we'll see how the politics of it plays out, because there are two things here. One is the existing stock of surpluses, the 9 lakh crore. And the other very important part of the story is what is going to be the framework for transfer of surpluses from now on. It is not something that should change every year. It should not be something political. You might need to amend the RBI Act to reduce that ambiguity. You might also want to make RBI budgets more transparent. So you bring them to the RBI board, which it should happen, and have them audited by CAG, as all other regulators and arms of government are. So you need to work very hard on that framework, and I think in the attention on the 9 lakh crores, not enough attention is being given to the big question of what from here on.
Okay. But it looks like if this is the correct plan the Bimal Jalan panel has found, and going by what Ela has to say, that spread it out over tranches might turn out to be the ideal solution to fix this friction, or arrive at a solution between the government and the Reserve Bank of India. Thanks for watching this episode of Elanomics, and we'll be back next week with another one. Please keep watching us.